So today at Todd's Dodge Garage, we are back on another 1966 Dodge Charger. One thing I get asked about a lot is instrument cluster removal from these cars. This car happens to be equipped with a clock, automatic transmission, air conditioning, so it's got HVAC controls. They restored the car, and you'll notice something might be missing from the instrument cluster. It's not that important of a gauge, just the speedometer. How and why they left that out, I have no idea. The customer wants the speedometer reinstalled. This could be a sign that there's bigger issues with the gauge cluster, but we don't know. So at this point, we need to go ahead and pull this instrument cluster and figure out what's going on and go from there. I'll be right back. So I'm going to put you guys down and let you see how I go ahead and take an instrument cluster out of a first gen Charger. First thing you want to do is grab a 3/32 Allen wrench and remove these pie shaped pieces, which are your climate control, always have the battery disconnected when you do this. I've already gone ahead and disconnected the battery. Remove the radio knobs themselves. Then you need a 5/8 deep socket, and you're just going to loosen the nuts. You have to have the glove box open, and then there's 4 screws underneath the climate control. It's the second one in from the right, and then the screw closest to the gauge pod here. The other 2 you just leave alone. There for the climate control plate. This one's missing that one. There's one underneath the cluster. There's one up here in the upper corner. Typically there's one in the center. That one is not there. Next, you want to remove the plate for the steering column. Now you want to get a ratchet with a 7/16 deep socket. You want to drop the column. Now you don't have to take it all the way down. Just loosen the nuts far enough for the column just to relax and drop on itself. Take out the final screw for the bezel. So now you've taken off your radio knobs, your radio nuts. You've taken off the 2 pie-shaped pieces for the climate control. You've taken out the screws around the perimeter, the 4 screws for the plate, 2 7/16 nuts for the steering column. Then what you do is you pull down as you kind of rock this out past the dash frame. And you want to be real careful. And then you can just pull it forward. The radio will just fall in its spot if you're very careful. You don't need to do anything with that. Now the speedometer cable you can lay on your back underneath here and reach up and unscrew it from the speedometer. You can do that. Or you can pull this out far enough to where you get your hand behind here and release the speedometer cable, but just don't start yanking on it because you've got a lot of wires. All that's happened is by taking all those screws out, you've given yourself enough room just to get back there to get things unhooked. The first thing you do is unhook the white wire with the red connector. That's for your electroluminescence. Then unhook your turn signal indicators. They just pop out. Your tach sending unit. That's a single yellow wire. Then your oil temperature, or oil pressure and coolant temperature. Pigtails come right off the gauges. Okay, so now we've got everything disconnected. Now you'll give yourself just a little more room, and you can see that sort of wiggles just a little bit. And you can get your hand back here and take off your fuel sending unit wire. The 5-volt signal wire. That 5 volt is what feeds the coolant gauge and oil pressure gauge. Then you unhook the black wire with the white tracer. That's your 12 volts from your harness to your cluster. And this is why you want to have your battery disconnected now, because now you're going to take off the amp gauge wires. You just need a 3/8 wrench. Quick pop those nuts loose. Take off the black amp gauge wire and the red one, doesn't matter in what order you do it. Now the cluster is free to come out. So now I just kind of hold the wire harnesses, get them out of the way, and you very gently and easily slide the cluster out of the car. This is what you're left with. A big hole in your dash. There's the radio. That's just sitting there. That'll stay just fine there. Here's your wire harnesses for the right hand side of the cluster, your oil pressure, coolant temperature, tach sending unit, turn signal indicator bulb. That's your high beam. That's your lamps not locked light, turn signal, 12 volts for the cluster, amp gauge wires, and then of course your fuel gauge sending unit and voltage wire. So that is that. And then of course here is your speedometer cable. They have that routed in correctly, so that actually fits down in there. There's a bracket for it. Okay, so there's that. All wires are routed properly. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. My phone shut off or stopped videoing. I was in the middle, sitting in the car and explaining just how I kind of route the wires after I get the cluster out, just so I keep everything organized. So to recap real quick, to remove the instrument cluster is really not that difficult. You've got some screws basically around the perimeter here, 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 of course on the bottom, here and here. And then there's two above the climate control. It's going to be the screw closest to the temperature gauge pod, and it's going to be the second screw in. These other two screw holes just leave alone, therefore the climate control plate in the back. And so the first thing you can do is pull the radio knobs off, take the two 9/16 nuts off, loosen up the screws around the perimeter of the cluster here, then go ahead and drop the steering column down. Then basically you push down on this as you kind of tilt it out, get yourself just a little bit of room. Then you can get your hand behind here to remove the speedometer cable, or you can lay up underneath the dash and do it. Then you'll get yourself a little more room, and you can actually flip it up like this, and then you can disconnect all these wires and mark all the wire locations. So it really doesn't take that long. I mean, you can really, if you know what you're doing, you can do it in about 10 minutes, very, very carefully. So with that, I hope that helps someone out. I hope that helps answer questions about how to remove an instrument cluster from a 66 or 67 Dodge Charger. Until next time, this is Todd with Todd's Dodge Garage.